Welcome back to Neuroconvergent Leadership, where we explore effective communication with people who are neurodivergent in some way or just neurodifferent than you are. I'm Jeremy Doran. I help great engineers become great leaders, and today we're going to talk about that very thing, how to make the transition from being an engineer into a leadership role. Our guest is Edward Morgan. He's the founder of the Gordian Knot, where he helps companies streamline the process of hiring excellent engineers. He has a long background in engineering himself and managed to make the transition into being an effective leader largely on his own. Ed, welcome.
Hi, Jeremy. Thanks.
It is exciting to have you here. Can you first start out by telling us a little bit more about Gordian Knot and what it is that you do there?
Sure. Gordian Knot's my business. It's a small consulting firm that I founded about a year ago after leaving corporate work. We help companies examine their hiring processes, figure out where there's gaps, and then help them restructure them. So we'll do everything from helping them figure out what their strategy is around hiring for a particular role and how that dovetails with their company strategy, right down to training individual interviewers on how to interview effectively and everything in between.
And this is primarily or exclusively for engineers, is that correct?
This is primarily for software engineers, yes.
Okay. Now, you are in this role. Is that because software engineers are more difficult to hire? Is hiring difficult everywhere, or is there a difference for engineers?
So hiring is difficult everywhere. Trying to figure out if somebody's going to be a good fit for a role is a little bit of magic. But software engineers are a little extra tricky for a few reasons. One is the preponderance of neurodivergent individuals that you have in software engineering roles. They tend to respond to questions differently than some other people might respond to them. The other is that they're very expensive. And that's both on the hiring side and on the interviewing side. If you make a mistake hiring a software engineer, you're going to end up spending a lot of money. Studies say up to twice their annual salary is what you could lose. So for a $100,000 software engineer, that's $200,000 or more you could lose. And even if you get it right, if you're interviewing a lot, you're spending a lot of time tying up your existing engineers and interviewing new engineers. So it's very complicated and it's time intensive because of the skills that are involved and because of the nature of the people that are involved.
That is fascinating. Can you share a little bit more about how they answer questions differently than others? And my follow-up, I'll let you know ahead of time. Is it more effective for a software engineer to interview for software engineers? Does that make it easier? Or is that something an HR person can do? Or what are the differences?
So yes. A great example that I saw actually just this morning as I was reading through some things was a neurodivergent software engineer who didn't know how to answer the question, can you tell me a little bit about yourself? Because his brain would sort of short circuit and he would say, well, where do you want me to start? Do you want me to start at the beginning, like my earliest memory? Should I start in high school? That lack of specificity can be really difficult. I think that's true of sort of neurodivergent folks in general, but it's very hard for engineers who are used to finding a specific answer to a question. Having that sort of specificity, those guardrails in which they're going to answer a question, can be really tough. So an untrained interviewer can just sort of launch into what they feel is an ordinary conversation, but they're going to get some weird signals back out of the engineers that they're interviewing.
So I know that when I was solving problems in engineering school, I would always start by listing my assumptions.
Yes.
And it sounds like when you're making those sorts of questions, you have to list the assumptions for them so that they'll know how to answer correctly.
Yeah. Question construction when it comes to interviewing software engineers is hugely important. You need to make sure that you're being very specific about the parameters in which somebody's going to answer a question. And that's not, just because they tend to be neurodivergent, like that's just how in general they tend to think. And it's also just good practice for everybody. when you're asking a question that can be broadly interpreted, you end up with signals kind of all over the place. And it doesn't really let you know, will this person be good at this particular role? Um, like you want to design a question that is really conducive to getting similar answers from people based on their experience. And if you can start at the beginning of your life or somewhere in college, you're going to get a vast array of different answers, and it's going to be hard to compare those when you debrief.
Interesting. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah,
Now, going back to the other thing that we had talked about is the fact that you yourself were a software engineer for a long time and made the transition into management. Can you tell me how that transition came about and why you decided to make that jump?
sure. Uh, I'm not sure decided is the right word. It was sort of decided for me.
You were voluntold.
Yes. So I was working for the Massachusetts uh, Council on Developmental Disabilities, and I had built a grant management application for them, and we needed some additional help. So I had to bring in another developer and a QA engineer. We also brought out an intern to help us out with some other things. So I pretty quickly went from just being the lead engineer, the guy who was responsible for doing everything, to now the guy who was responsible for leading these three other people. And I immediately realized that I was not good at this at all. Um, that's, like what I expected out of a manager was not what I was doing. Luckily, they were all wonderful, wonderful people. They were very tolerant of the fact that I had no clue what I was doing, and helped me to get better. But yeah, I made that jump because of necessity, not necessarily out of desire.
Got it. So, what did you do if you recognized that you weren't being the manager and the leader that you wanted to be? What steps did you take to get there?
So a lot of it was going back to the honestly the managers that I hated, and thinking, what did I really despise about them? Like what was it that they did that I genuinely disliked? And I would try to avoid doing those things. I don't think I had a lot at that point in my career. I didn't have a lot of great managers that I could look back on and say, like this person was a real mentor to me. This person really helped me in my career, and I want to emulate them. There were a few people out there. If Rich Talipsky is listening to this, he was a great mentor. He wasn't my direct manager though. He led the organization that I worked for, and he was kind and he was thoughtful. He used to command nuclear submarines, and he was a lovely guy. So I tried to bring some of that forward to whatever I could do when I was working with my team. But yeah, in general, I would think I hated it when this guy did this thing to me. Like, so I'm going to make sure I don't do that thing. And then I would have to
Do you
find
have
some sort
have you got
of,
any examples of things people have done that you didn't care for?
sure, I think micromanagement is the biggest thing. If I have a plan to get something done and somebody comes along and tells me you have to do it in this way, I'm going to be mad for two reasons. One is that I already had a plan and I want to do the plan my way. Uh, and two is I had a plan and you didn't need to tell me, right? Um, you made this assumption that I didn't have a plan or I wasn't going to get things done, and it's I think the same thing that happens with my kids when they have a plan to take the trash out, but then I come along and I tell them, hey, you got to take the trash out. They immediately don't want to take the trash out.
Mm-hmm.
Like they get irritated by the fact that they're now told to do something, whereas before they were happy to volunteer to do it. And so I have a lot of that too. But with micromanagement, like that would be the thing that would really drive me insane. Um, like I like having the freedom and the creativity to be able to solve problems in my own way and in my own time, and I wanted to be supported in that. I didn't want to be told what to do and when to do it. So I made this assumption that many other people would feel that same way. And That seemed to be true for most of the folks that I managed. But that's what I did. I said, I didn't like this thing. Let me figure out a replacement behavior so that I do something different instead.
That is excellent. I will tell you a quick story about myself. I'm very much that way. If I'm being told what to accomplish, I do not want to be told how to do it. And I assumed everyone was that way as well. When I hired people, I acted as if that's what they wanted, and I wouldn't give them very clear instruction, and very often it wouldn't get done. I learned to ask people, when you're given a task, would you like to figure out how to do it on your own, or would you like me to tell you all of the steps? And it was fascinating. They didn't even know how to answer because it never occurred to them that there were differences. And
Yeah.
then I'll explain it again, and half of them, less than half, would say, oh, yeah, if you tell me how to do it, I'm going to get mad. But more than half, probably two-thirds, said, well, if you don't give me all the steps, how am I going to know how to do it?
Right.
Like, great. Either answer was great. As long as I know, then I can work with them that way going forward.
Yeah. It's really interesting because when I started out, my assumption was that the way my thought processes worked were the way everyone's thought processes worked. So this is going back to my late 20s at this point when I was first sort of thrust into management. And I didn't know that there were other ways to sort of be in the world. And so I just thought anything that was good for me was going to be good for everybody else. And that led to some less than stellar results when I first started managing. So I did learn. Like there were folks that I had honest and open conversations with, and I was like, why is it that you aren't making the progress that like I thought you should have been making? And they're like, well, you're not telling me what to do. I don't have like a list of things that I need to accomplish by a certain time. I was like, yeah, but I've given you the strategy and I've given you the overall goals, right? Like you should be able to see like what it is you need to do in order to get there. And they were like, no, I, I maybe I could do that, but I definitely do not want to do that. Like I want to be told like you do this thing at this specific time, and then once that's done, I'm going to go home and I'm not going to think about work again. And that's a perfectly reasonable way to be. It was just not something that had occurred to me early on in my management career.
I talk about assumptions so often on this podcast. It makes communication so difficult because we all assume others think, process, and communicate the way we do, and it just causes so many problems.
Yeah.
But good on you for stopping and asking the question of where's the disconnect and how can we resolve it and move forward. So that was brilliant.
Oh, nice. Yeah, I like to take an engineering approach to many things. With software engineering, constant inspection of the product, determining whether or not you're delivering value to the customer is a huge part of figuring out whether or not you're being successful. So I just sort of took that model and applied it to managing humans and would say, am I getting the results that I expect? Do my users, like the team that reports to me, like do they get the value from me that I think that I am delivering to them? And the only way I could figure out how to do that was to regularly ask them to give me feedback, whether that was anonymized feedback or direct feedback in one-to-ones. I absolutely craved feedback. It was probably the hallmark of my management style was that I would bug people to no end to give me feedback because I really wanted to know how I was doing for them, so that they could help me be a better manager to them.
I love that you took an engineering approach to developing soft skills.
It was that's how I do a lot of things. When it comes to figuring out just about anything, I'm going to take the problem. I'm going to see what models I have out there that fit that sort of paradigm, and I'm going to see if I can apply that model to solve the problem that I currently have. And agile software development helps solve a lot of problems. Not all. I do know of one engineer uh, who tried to do daily stand-ups in his house, have like weekly sprints where everybody would complete a certain set of tasks and then do a retrospective at the end, talk about what they liked about the task and what they didn't. His wife and children thought he was absolutely insane, and that experiment did not last very long. So there are limitations to what you can do, but I do think that you know there's a lot that can be gained by taking an engineering mindset when you're talking about problems, even solve problems. When it comes to communication, for example, um, being introspective about things, trying to figure out where things went wrong, gathering more information. Like these are all parts of the software development process, and they're all parts of kind of how we relate to one another.
Wonderful. In addition to asking people for feedback, what other training or more formal learning did you do in order to become a good manager?
Oh, there were a bunch of books that I read, but it was all self-directed. Um, I never received any formal training as a manager, but I did read The Manager's Path, which I found really helpful. Um, Radical Candor, which I found absolutely fascinating, um, and a book called Managing Humans. And those three really helped to refine the way I approached the problems that I had. Not so much with my immediate team, with the people who reported to me, because that I think worked. Like that, I had not solved the problem, but I had a good methodology for solving problems when it came to people who reported to me. The real problem that I ended up having was the people that I reported to.
Mm.
So managing down was fairly easy. Managing up was the thing that I probably could have used a little bit more formal training on. So I never did get very good at it.
How large was the company?
So there's a few different companies. So I've worked at companies where I was employee number 45, and then I worked at companies that had 20,000 employees. So in smaller companies, I tend to manage up better. You have more personal relationships with people. I think they get to understand your quirks and the way you think. In large companies, I don't tend to manage up well. It's something that I still struggle to understand why the relationships I had with my bosses didn't go the way I thought they were going to go. Um, Somebody pointed out this term the other day. I wasn't sure I'd heard before, but it was called pessimistic optimism. Um, and I think that's a lot of what I bring to organizations. I certainly, I'm often pointing out problems, but I'm
Hmm.
pointing out problems because I believe it's okay for there to be problems. I think it's okay for people to not be perfect, but I don't think it's okay to just leave those problems the way they are. I think that we should work together to try to solve those problems. And I don't think that my particular blend of pessimistic optimism was received in that way. Um, I think people saw the pessimism, but they didn't see the optimism.
Were the things you were pointing out about the individual or just process within the organization?
Yeah, it was almost always process. Like if there was a problem that I had with an individual, I would take that to them personally, and they and I would have a conversation about that. But it was usually, hey, this process that we have is not great, right? It is not leading to the results that we want. No one enjoys working under this process. You know, there's literally nothing good about this process except for the fact that it's been in place for many years. So, like, why don't we take a little bit of time and a little bit of effort and just change one thing about it, and just see where that gets us, right? As long as we're not doing the same thing, we're making some sort of progress. And that was really hard sell for lots of people. That avoidance of change is a real thing, and it was tough for a lot of people. And I think too, I don't know if it's my particular approach towards how I describe problems, but I think that the people I reported to uh, took affront to the way I presented the problems to them. Um, I don't know if I was too blunt. I don't know if it was just that I was pointing out problems that were sort of theirs to fix. And maybe they had a plan to fix it and they didn't want to be told how to fix it. I don't really know. I never really got the feedback that I wanted to get from those folks to understand sort of what was going well and what was going poorly.
It's interesting. I've done a lot of assessments of people in management across the board, and engineers in particular tend to be very system focused.
Mm.
If there's a system in place, they're going to want to follow that system and they're not going to want to shake things up on average.
Yeah.
So you're probably running into some of that. And then people always say that they want feedback, but very often they really don't, is what I've found. So that can be a
Yeah.
challenge.
Yeah. And again, like I crave feedback, right? Without feedback, like the whole loop that I have falls apart. Right? Because like I need that feedback in order to be introspective about how I've been doing so that I can make changes and I can improve. That's been my approach to I mean just about everything in my life. Certainly when I was a software engineer, my developing my hard skills were like that. Moving into management was like that. Even learning how to be a dad to my kids. Like I made a ton of mistakes when I first became a single dad, and I needed to figure out how do I do better, right? Like my kids, super great at giving feedback, instantaneous feedback from the kids. Never had to worry about that. But when I get into a situation where I don't get that feedback, I really, really struggle. And I think that's been the cause of lots of issues for me, throughout my career, which also makes it hard for me to understand why other people don't want that feedback. Because to me, like that's one of the most valuable things you could possibly give me is feedback. Whether it's positive or negative, like I want to know, especially if it's negative, because that helps me be a better person. And it's I don't know, it requires some mental gymnastics for me to understand people who don't want that sort of feedback. It's a little tough for me.
Well, it's great that you want it, but I am going to agree with you that many people don't really want that.
Yeah.
So, so you, when you became a manager, made the very proactive step of reading a bunch of books and seeking feedback. Many people are not proactive, and many companies don't have any process for training new managers. They're just expected to be able to make the transition from engineer to manager and get very little training. What do you think the company could have done to have made the transition easier for you?
Yeah, I think, in the specific situations I was in, there weren't a whole lot of resources available. Um, like the small state agency that I worked for, they really didn't have anybody else working in software engineering at all. So I was the lone software engineer at that organization. So I had nobody else to look up to. I didn't like I don't think they could have done anything differently. Except maybe they probably could have sent me off to a course somewhere, right? Like if they had just sent me to a I don't know 3-day course someplace to just talk about the basics of these things, at least I would have been able to wrap my brain around here are some of the basics of managing people. Um, because as it was, I was like, I don't even really, I don't know what I should do with these people. Should I have one-on-ones with them? What are one-on-ones? Right? Like I had never had those in my career up to that point. Um, so like how do you actually manage people, right? How do you see what they're doing? How do you help them to improve? Um, I think it really just, like steps 1, 2, and 3 for how to be not even a good manager, just how to be a manager would have been really helpful.
Just base level
Right.
training.
Yeah.
Interesting. So you had the double whammy of not getting training and also not even having someone to emulate because you were so on your own in your own division, kind of.
Yeah. Yeah, I came into software engineering in a really strange way. So I started out studying journalism in school, and I accepted as a job as an editor at a law library, which seems like it would fit. But what they wanted was really more of a data entry person. Um,
Mm.
I was scanning in documents and editing them, like basically fixing typos and like that the OCR had introduced. Um, and I found this so dull that I figured out a way to automate that process. Kind of automated myself out of a job, and then ended up building the library's website, connecting its card catalog to the internet, just sort of figuring these things out on my own. But again, I was in a situation where I was the only technical person there. I didn't have a technical manager. After that, I left and I built my own websites as a freelancer for a while. And then I started at this state agency. And so I didn't really have any traditional management at all until suddenly I was being asked to be a manager. And I was really just thrown into the deep end.
Your case is kind of extreme, but it's not as uncommon as you would think.
Yeah.
Most companies have no process for training new managers. They don't have anyone that they outsource it to. It's just expected that the manager of the manager will know how to teach them to do it, and that person usually doesn't. So
Yeah.
good on you for going out and finding resources for yourself and reading books and doing that.
Say it's one of the things that that led me to start the business that I have, which is the same thing happens with interviewing. Most of the time, you have you get no training in how to interview people, let alone how to interview software engineers. So that's one of the most important pieces that I provide in my work, because it's really just assumed you're going to know how to do it, when in fact most people do not.
On that topic, how can people reach out and learn more about what you do and or reach out to you with specific questions?
Sure. You can come find me on LinkedIn. I'm pretty active there. Edward P. Morgan is my handle there. Or you can come to my website, which is www.gordianknot.company. Um, and there's a form there that will allow you to book some time with me if you want to chat.
Wonderful. And I'm going to include that in the show notes so people can just click and find you that way. In the interest of time, we need to start wrapping up. So I'm going to start with our three questions. The first is, where is a place you've traveled and loved? And where is a place you've not yet been but want to go?
So I have been to Bali in Indonesia,
Ooh,
which is one of the most beautiful places on earth. It's got a good reputation and it is well deserved. I spent a lovely 10 days there about 10 years ago now, and would love to go back.
I was going to say, so it's about time to go back.
Yes, yeah. Yeah, now that my kids are older and I can just leave them on their own, it's definitely time to go back.
Fun.
As for a place that I haven't been that I want to go, there are so many. I think the latest trip that I've been planning is an around the world journey that does not use airplanes at all.
Ooh,
So leaving from New York, taking an ocean liner to London, taking trains across all of Europe and Asia, and then sailing back across the Pacific, and then taking trains all the way back home. I would, yeah, it would probably take about 3 to 4 months, but I would love to try that someday.
fun. You need to add a hot air balloon into that mix too.
Yes, and do it within 80 days. Yes.
Yes. Hurry up. The second question is, who is a great communicator, whether it's just a personal friend of yours or a historic figure?
So I'm going to go back and give Rich Talipsky another shout out. He was the submarine captain that I worked for early on in my career. He was very quiet. but he was very direct and to the point. He could accept feedback. He invited feedback in a way that was really welcoming and comforting to the people that were around him. And he did a fantastic job at managing the small place that I worked at.
Wonderful. That's 2 shout outs. Now he owes you a cup of coffee or something.
Yeah.
And my final question is, what is one piece of communication advice that we can all benefit from?
Yeah, I mean, to sort of, you know, beat a dead horse, I guess, is don't make assumptions. You know, the biggest problems I've had in communication have been with assuming that I know what's going on in somebody else's head. Like once I stopped doing that, or once I started doing that less often, I found that my communication drastically improved. So ask questions. Don't assume you know the answers. Go up to people and say, "Hey, I think that this might be going on. Can you tell me if that's true or not?" It really helps to set the stage for better communication.
It's like you're a plant because I must give that piece of advice 3 times every episode. So thank you for putting that. Ed, this has been a pleasure. I appreciate it so much. Thank you for being our guest today.
Yeah, thank you so much. So
Talk to you
it's been
again
lovely
soon.
to be on. All right.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thanks.